Hi, class. This is Professor Koji, and this is Chapter Four's lecture on communicating effectively. So, there's some communication assumptions we'll start with. That communication creates as well as reflects reality. Communication is the real work of managers, and communication is not a predictable, controllable process. There's really nothing more important to you as a manager than communication. It's the transparency that you provide to your team. It's your ability to communicate what the goals of your department are. It's your really responsibility to help communicate how your employees can be better, how they can reach their fullest potential. Communication is the rawest form of how business operates. There's nothing more important, and it's just critical to everything you do in business. So we're going to be getting into some active listening. So the major barriers to communication. The major barrier to mutual interpersonal communication is a very natural tendency to judge, to evaluate, or approve or disapprove the statement of another person or another group. Real communication occurs, and this is evaluative tendency is avoided when we listen with understanding. What does that mean? It means to see the expressed idea and attitude from other person's points of view. It's very easy, especially when you're in a dialogue with someone, it's too easy to start thinking about your response without truly understanding what the other person is saying. And when you're focused on trying to think about what you're going to say next, you lose some of the meaning, and you actually might not hear everything that person is trying to tell you. What are they trying to convey? And that can really hinder a proper dialogue and a productive dialogue if you're not allowing that person to say what they have to say and you fully paying attention as well. And paying attention not only means not trying to think of what your response is going to be, but making sure that you're eliminating distractions as well. So put your phone down, right? Put your laptop down or the lid down. Make sure you're focusing on that person. I've seen a lot of managers who actually will not, you be in their office and they're not looking at you. You're talking, they're not looking at you, they're looking at their screen. And it just really shows what that manager is caring about. So remember this, what you're looking and focused on is what's most important in that moment. So if you have an employee who's talking to you and you're looking at your screen, they're going to feel less valued. They're going to feel they're little to you. You want to make sure that you're focusing on them. Listening for understanding requires courage. If you really understand other people in this way, if you're willing to enter their private world and see the way life appears to them, you run the risk of being changed yourself. This goes back to focusing and paying attention and listening to understand, listening for the deeper meanings, looking for nonverbal cues. What people say is important, but how they say it and their mannerisms and their facial expressions and their body posture, all those things contribute to the message. It's not just the verbal, it's the nonverbal as well. So in order to really truly understand someone, you have to give them your full attention. What a lot of people do sometimes, especially in the corporate environment, is the manager, and this is something you can do if you have your own office, leave the office. Go to a cafe that's nearby if you have one on your floor. Go into a conference room that's just neutral. There's no distractions there. And so you can have a focused conversation, especially if you think your employee has something very important to say that's personal. Maybe their wife is sick, whatever it might be. There's some really delicate moments, and your ability to build that relationship comes from focusing on them and having a proper dialogue. So active listening. So I thought this was an interesting chart here. So listening for understanding, that's really paying attention. So when you listen to understand, when you try listening for understanding, it decreases defensiveness, increases understanding, increases the information for what you can absorb, and it increases the trust and respect. I just gave an example. If you're talking to me and I'm looking at my screen, that's not showing much respect. And they're certainly not going to trust that you heard everything they said. And this not only in your professional lives, but in your personal lives as well. When someone speaks to you, are you giving them your undivided attention? And also conversely, if you're speaking to someone else and they're not looking at you, looking at their phone, how does that make you feel? It doesn't feel good. And so this leads to increasing the possibility for individual and organizational change and growth. If you're willing to listen to people, if you're willing to take in their ideas, if you're willing to take in their thoughts and what they believe and how they feel, that will then invest them into the company and into you. And that will then create a following for you. And that's what leadership is all about, creating a following. People make a mistake that if you're a manager, you're a leader, or if you're a CEO of a company, you're a leader. No, it's not. That's not true. A leader and manager is completely different. You as you or anyone who is an individual contributor, I mean, you don't have direct reports, you could be a leader. You could have people follow you, right? Whatever the initiative may be, if you're starting a book club or whatever it could be, or even within your work group. There's some work groups where a senior level person on the team who's an individual contributor has more influence and has a bigger following than the manager does. That's just sometimes how it is. So managers who don't listen to others are unlikely to hear important information, especially cautionary information or bad news that can help them manage high-risk situations. This usually occurs when you're having like an all-team meeting. So let's say, for example, every week you have an all-team meeting. You have, let's say, 10 direct reports, and you're all in a conference room or a virtual conference room. Actually, let's talk about not even in-person conference room, because business is so globalized now, especially with COVID, everyone's home, right? So when you think in terms of having a virtual conference where there's 10 people on there, and it's very easy to become distracted because no one's holding you accountable to the conversation. They're not looking at you. Even if you have your video on, that does not bar you from typing to someone, right? You can still kind of bypass that, if you will. And it's very distracting. And you as a manager, you need to be plugged into that meeting, because you could be missing incredible important information about clients, about internal partners, about vendors, about customers, whatever it might be. You could be losing valuable information that is required of you, especially if you have to report up to your leadership, your management. You have to have that information, so you have to be paying attention. So here's some keys to active listening, or listening actively. So number 1, listen with empathy. Number 2, listen with intensity. Number 3, demonstrate acceptance. Number 4, take responsibility for completeness. Number 5, be yourself. And something that really gels these things together when you're actively listening, and what active listening is, by the way, is when you're giving verbal or nonverbal cues to the speaker that you're listening. So nodding your head, responding back with just to clarify a point. And someone says, yeah, I've got this red Corvette. It runs really well. I just got it the other day. Oh, so you bought a red Corvette. That's great. That's an active listening. You're confirming that you're listening to what they're saying, and that you're grasping the key concepts and the meanings that that speaker is conveying to you. And all these things are important as well. So what are killer phrases? Let me give you some examples and explain it. So a killer phrase: don't rock the boat. It will never work. The boss will never go for it. People don't want change. We tried that before. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yes, but. So a killer phrase is essentially you're putting the kibosh on someone's ideas. You are not allowing them to fully explain it. You are not being open. You're not seeing the bigger picture. You're letting your own biases in your past and any experience dictate the negativity that you have for this individual without trying to fully understand it. And that's a problem. It's a problem because it's going to be a confidence killer for people, and it really stifles their creativity. So, especially for you as a manager, you do not want to stifle your people. You want to listen, pay attention, allow them to speak their minds, don't interrupt them. And and if the idea, not every idea is going to be good, right? But that doesn't mean that they can't express it and that you can't ask questions to get clarity, because they want to be heard. They're coming to you because they trust you. They feel they're in a safe environment and they think they have a great idea. And if you say, no, that's terrible, then that's just going to shut them down. They're not going to be speaking up anymore. And when they do have an awesome idea, they won't bring it to you because they'll feel like you just shoot it down. So here's a tip for you. So instead of, if someone has an idea, an employee has an idea that is not going to work, what you can say is, thank you so much for bringing this to me. I see you put a lot of time and attention to it. However, because of X, Y, and Z, that's not something we can do now, but we can put it in a roadmap for something we can discuss further. That's a good example of how you can respond. There's 1,000 different ways depending on the situation, of course. So providing effective feedback is our next section here. So friendly feedback work environment. So feedback is extremely important. I said in the previous, I think it was chapter 3 lecture, that giving feedback continuously and periodically, and not just when there's a performance review, is vitally important. So set clear, measurable performance standards. You can't provide feedback by saying, I need you to get better. I need you to get better at producing this report. What does that mean? If you're not being clear, if you're not giving specific measurable outcomes that you need, it's just like you're in a soccer field. You give an employee a soccer ball with no goals anywhere, and you tell them, okay, go make a goal. It's impossible. So set clear, measurable performance standards. Give ongoing feedback. I harped on that a lot, but it's so very important. Find opportunities to give positive feedback. There's an old saying that, catch people in the act, and it's usually referring to a negative thing. Catch people when they're doing something bad. No, catch people when they're doing something good and positive, and let them know about it. Let them know what they're doing is great. And don't just talk about the outcome. Don't just say, oh, great job on the report. Looks good. Talk about talk about and praise what it took to create the report. Hey, nice job working with Sally over in accounting and pulling those reports last week and using our system to do it. Give specifics in the behavior, because people are able to understand and repeat a behavior that led to the positive result, then replicating that result, because you're not always going to get the result. Every baseball team, the Boston Red Sox, which I like, they're not going to win every game. But if they're executing well, if they are working hard, if they're communicating, these are the things that can be replicated to set them up for success. Set a tone of openness. Always use this, and especially when you're writing emails and talking to employees or talking to anyone, at the end of an email, always say, please let me know if you have any questions. Allow and give permission for your team to provide you feedback, to ask questions. It's a simple thing, but very powerful. I learned early in my career. Make sure organizational managers and leaders are role models for feedback, and managers must know policies and policies. It probably should be policies and procedures regarding feedback as well. So another thing you don't want to get into, this is kind of a trap, it's a friend trap. You want to be respectful and you want to develop friendships, but it's very, very dangerous to develop have strong friends there, because number one, you could be alienating other people and you could be shutting people out. It could cause resentment. Again, you should be friendly with everyone. You should build great relationships with everyone, but make sure you know where that threshold is between friendship being professional friends at work and developing personal relationships that turn into more than these friendships. So just be careful about that. Providing effective feedback to your employees and to your team. Very important section here. Select the right moment. Again, when you try to catch when people are doing something good, that's a good moment. Do it when they're not, and as far as when to do it, the right moment of providing feedback is not when they're on a call with a customer or when they're close to a deadline and they're working hard. It's not a good it's not a good time to mosey on over to their desk and say, hey, how's it going? All right, you want to make sure you're picking the right moments. When there's downtime, maybe you schedule time on your calendar to have a lunch meeting with them. Just make sure you're finding the right moments. Select the right place. Select a neutral environment. I mentioned before that that your office may not be the right place for certain conversations. And so you want to make sure that maybe make it a little bit more informal. More informal means a little bit more comfortable for the employee. Go to a conference room or, again, go to a coffee shop. Something that makes them comfortable is sometimes the right place. And the right place could be your office. It could be something as fast, needs to have something resolved quickly. And you can't be placing a latte order. You gotta get it done now, right? And that feedback sometimes needs to happen immediately. Select an appropriate communication style. And communication styles vary. You could probably do some more research on this, but you just got to choose your own voice and your own style of how you're going to be communicating. Provide the purpose of the feedback. Make sure it's known up front and why you're doing it. Focus on key performance issues. Pretty straightforward. Be specific, not general. This is important to know. I talked about that again about this, but being too general doesn't solve anything. That doesn't help anyone. Being specific and focusing on specific behaviors, specific outcomes, is really crucial for the employee to understand what they did wrong. If this is a situation where you're giving feedback where they perform something incorrectly, you got to be specific and point things out. Be descriptive instead of evaluative, and provide positive feedback. Positive feedback's huge. It's something that gets people inspired, gets people motivated. And really, when you provide positive feedback, when you're catching them in the act of doing something well, they're more apt to repeat that behavior in the future. You know, it's like the Pavlov dog, which maybe you've read about. But Pavlov's dog experiment essentially was he had a dog, and every time he fed it food, he rang a bell. And then he would do this a handful of times, and then he would take the bowl away, ring the bell, and the dog would salivate. So the point is, you're putting in positive reinforcement things in place that allow the employee to feel great, and they yearn for your positive feedback because it makes them feel good. Providing effective feedback continues. So check that the receiver has understood the intended feedback. You may want to ask them point blank, so can you just repeat back to me what do you think that I'm looking for, right? They may say, I don't know. Because a lot of times employees will feel intimidated and they don't want to feel they didn't listen to you, understand you, but there's sometimes people's mind wander. And if it's really important, make sure that they understand it. And then even when they leave, send an email as a follow-up just to cover yourself and make sure that the employee knows exactly what your intentions are and what you're looking for. Encourage a response. Kind of just mentioned that, but have the employee respond, yes, I understand, no, I don't, or I kind of, but I need more information. Give time to react. Encourage the checking for accuracy of the feedback. And it kind of goes back to what I just mentioned. You know, if I say, hey, I need you to do 1, 2, and 3, and the employee says, okay, I'll get 1 and 2 done. You're checking the accuracy of their understanding, and it's not correct. So it's important that communication is not just you sending a message. Communication is you sending a message and the receiver understanding completely what you're saying. That's communication. So you have to ensure that. And an encouraging note and follow up as well. And follow up would be like I just mentioned, an email, for example. Asking for feedback. This can really do you wonders, asking for feedback. And this is something that people could be fearful of, and they don't really want to hear what other people have to say because it might be negative. But asking for feedback, especially when you're starting out, is very important so you can course correct yourself. So request some feedback from people you trust. It may be your manager, might be a perfect example, or it may be a peer of yours. As for specific behavior, do not be defensive. So if you're going to ask for feedback, you can't be defensive. You have to listen. Chances are you're not going to, you may not even agree with what they have to say, but you have to take it in and listen because they're pointing it out. And you are going to be blind to a lot of the stuff, and you may not be, but you're probably going to be blind to a lot of the stuff people have to say to you. And it might come as a shock, and it might then throw up your guard and say, no, you're wrong. I don't do that. But you might. So don't be so quick to be defensive. Do not overreact or underreact. Summarize what was said for understanding. Again, I'll reiterate it, that communication is not communication until the receiver understands what you have said. Explain what you are going to do about the feedback and thank the person for the input. You always want to be gracious. If you're asking people to take time out of the day to give you information about your performance, you want to make sure you're thanking them. So kind of getting feedback. So one piece of feedback, this actually happens in my day job, it is 360 feedback. This is more so happens probably on a bi-yearly basis. So every 6 months, or even potentially every year at performance time. And really almost all Fortune 500 companies use this type of feedback. They spend tons of money, millions of dollars to implement various feedback programs. But the most commonly used one is the 360-degree feedback, as it involves anonymous surveying of direct reports, peers, your bosses, and other people, sometimes even customers, to gain information about a specific manager's performance across the standard set of competencies. So communicating effectively, providing clear direction, setting clear performance measures, showing care and concern, and inspiring creativity are just some of the examples. The 360 feedback, especially when you start to get into the working world, you will have this. I don't really think that any company doesn't do this, or if they don't, they should, for sure. So why do it? What are the benefits of it? So once it's implemented, the 360 feedback provides managers information about what they're doing well and what they need to improve. And if you're not getting that feedback as a manager, if you're not soliciting it, if you're not getting it, how can you improve? How can you know what to improve? How can you know you're doing bad? Obviously, there are some indicators that people are leaving you, and there's tons of turnover, absenteeism, so forth. But once they have this information, managers can work toward leveraging their strengths and minimizing their weaknesses, so that they can give their boss, peers, and direct reports what they need to do their best work and achieve their work goals. So also, research suggests that 360 assessments can provide accurate feedback because you're getting it from multiple different angles. So the studies have shown that the feedback recipients who receive higher feedback ratings tend to receive more favorable annual reviews from their bosses. So that's incredibly important. And that's why doing those things is pretty critical to your growth. So how do you enhance the 360-degree feedback? If you're instituting this, if you are the manager who's actually doing these 360-degree feedback for your team, how do you enhance it? So select appropriate assessments. Choose appropriate time to do it. As I kind of alluded to time and being mindful of when the opportune time is to do it. So appropriate time for the new year is not January 1st. That's not appropriate time to give an assessment for the year. So think through how you want to do that. I think quarterly could be fine, but again, you don't want a bunch of people doing 360-degree surveys and feedback, because they're busy too. So it could be every 6 months, maybe quarterly could be acceptable. Prepare feedback prepare feedback providers to give useful feedback. The last thing you don't want is people to rush through a 360-degree feedback and just, yeah, he's good. Yeah, 10 stars for everything. You want useful feedback. You want feedback in which can help your employee grow and become better and address some deficiencies within their own personal way they're doing things. Remind the person doing the self-assessment that it doesn't pay to inflate self-perceptions. Honesty is huge with these things. If you are, what you put in is what you get out of it, and your honesty will dictate and drive how successful this will be for you and how you grow as a professional. Tell people what the 360 will be used for. It's pretty obvious and simple, but you just want to make sure it's for growth. It's for their own personal growth development, and just ensuring that they're being aware of what other people are saying in regards to their performance. What you shouldn't say is that, look, this is a way for me to get you and to dock you and do anything other negative. It's not something to be looked at as a negative, and you as a manager should not use it as anything more than that. It should be a way for you to gather information so you can learn and how you can help that employee grow. So continuing that, help the person receiving feedback to interpret it. Don't just send it to them, but allow them to give them some way to interpret and understand the information that's been provided. Maybe in some situations you have to speculate a little bit. If the receiver, your employee, is unsure of what this feedback meant, and by the way, everything's anonymous. You should never ever disclose any information or names. But anyway, you want to make sure that the person's understanding is sometimes you have to speculate a little bit what the person who's giving the feedback was trying to get at. And you can, and if it's really that vague, then you can just go back to that person and ask. Help the person create goal-setting plans. So not that they've seen what they need to improve, help them put a plan together. And don't just put a plan together. Make sure you're meeting periodically with that employee and ensure they're hitting milestones to achieve their goals. Provide training and develop opportunities. Encourage the employee to follow up with feedback providers. Repeat feedback process in future to determine if improvement is made. The 360 feedback is, think of it as benchmarking. You're setting a baseline for your employees, and you can then use the same questions. You don't have to use the same people, because people leave organizations, projects change, customers leave, whatever it might be. But that's not important. The important thing is, how is that employee doing now compared to the last time you took this? And it's just a comparison to see. The individual improvement from 360 is more likely to occur when recipients are doing the following. They feel positive about the feedback process. So you're talking it up as a positive thing, not a negative thing, or worse, not communicating about it at all. So they're just in the dark. And of course, when you don't know something and it's feedback related, your employees' minds are going to go a negative place of why you're doing it. And it causes trust issues as well. Are high in feedback orientation, have a sense of personal control, and believe change is possible. And that really is you setting that up before the surveys even go out, or the feedback, whatever the mechanism being used to solicit the feedback. That's just a cultural thing. That allowing your team to believe that change is possible, that they have a voice, that things can move in different directions, that we can pivot because of your feedback. That's all happening before this. Follow up with the raters after receiving the feedback, just to make sure that there's any clarification that's needed. Set achievable, meaningful goals for self-development. Take specific steps directed to achieving the self-development goals. And that could be, you could be setting them up with a coach, engage in self-reflection, engaging in training, and discuss results with direct reports, peers, and bosses. If you want people to give bad news when it occurs, so you want people, not if, you want people to give you bad news, because you understanding something that's going wrong immediately is important. Time is of the essence, and frustration grows every minute that issue or problem is not addressed from a customer, especially a customer, even internal partner, whatever it might be. So if the employee has something that need to tell you and it's urgent, you need to be accessible, you need to be approachable, you need to be able to say, yes, anything that you need, I'll be there for you. And don't feel there's backlash. Let's have a mentality of a positive intent that I'm going to help you. We're going to learn, grow together, and we're going to make sure that we overcome this situation. Surround yourself with independent minds, run meetings that encourage independent thinking and honest feedback, be discreet about sources, and never shoot the messenger. So run meetings that encourage independent thinking. This goes back to having a positive, open culture that you are setting the example for. This means that every time you have a meeting, you are acting the same. You're being consistent. That when people speak up, you're not criticizing them in front of anyone. When someone has an idea that you don't think may be a good one, you're not saying that. You're saying, thank you for your contribution. All these things here, this happens every day. This does not happen once. And you can lose trust. We talked about trust in the last chapter, but you can build up trust for months and months and months and lose it in saying one thing, then it's gone. So if you have positive run meetings and someone brings up a situation in a team meeting and you yell at them, blow up, swear at them, God forbid, you never do that. Your trust is gone. Your credibility is shot because you have to gain that trust back, and it takes time to rebuild that trust. So be discreet about sources. Very important. You want to make sure that you're not throwing other people in the bus. People don't like that. And never shoot the messenger. I think it's pretty straightforward as well. When you get bad news, say, please tell me more. What do you think we should do? Thank you for bringing this to my attention. So my personal business that I have outside of my day job, I do this all the time. When someone comes to me and there's an issue and they present it, I don't want people to come to me with a problem without thinking through a solution to the problem or thinking about what the next step should be. Just saying, hey, Dave, this X, Y, and Z is not working right. Okay, well, what do you think we should do? So that second bullet point is exactly what I say. What do you think we should do? What would you do in this situation? And 9 times out of 10, you will see your employee has the answer. They just don't have confidence to do it. Or they may think that they do it might be wrong. Allow them to do that. And if it's wrong, if they say what they say, well, I would do this. Like, well, I think that's a good thought. And you want to validate that they've provided feedback and they put themselves out there. But I think we should try this, right? And this helps in the learning. Communication and culture. So gender, and I think I say so a lot in these lectures, so I apologize. I just said so again. Anyway, I digress. So gender differences in communication. Men are more likely to express themselves directly and women are more likely to express themselves indirectly. Women are more likely to emphasize, rapport talk, like relationship building, and men are more likely to emphasize report talk, information giving. So what this is saying is that women are more relationship oriented and men tend to be more information giving. Women are more likely than men to give verbal and nonverbal signals that they are listening to others, such as making eye contact, nodding their head, saying, uh-huh. And what those things are, we just talked about this, is the active listening, the nodding, the uh-huh, the eye contact, all critical things to active listening. But fast forward to here, that's the difference a lot of times with men and women. And my experience is that I think men, and I don't know why, I'm not a psychologist, but I think women are more apt, and this is just DNA, this is genetics, that women are more apt to have those relationships, the more the caring side, and men are more like the hunter-gatherer type of mentality. Men need to work on this, and I myself work on this a lot, and I think I do a pretty good job of it. But this is something that's a lot of weakness for men, and you have to recognize it, be real with yourself, and then take steps to eliminate any distractions that would divert your attention. So we'll continue with gender differences in communication. Both men and women tend not to interrupt men, but men are more likely than women to interrupt women. Men may be more likely than women to send emails with neutral or negative emotional content. And as a caveat, our communication styles are the result of many factors, not just gender, which is true. Personality, experience, what training you have, your family dynamics, and etc. can influence communication style. So be careful not to make assumptions about preferred styles solely based on gender. And that's a stereotype. When you start stereotyping men, stereotyping women, then it's putting a guard up, essentially. When you start stereotyping people, you're not allowing them to show who they really are and their true potential, because you're already putting them down. You should not do that. Enhancing cross-cultural communication. So not just speaking with men and women, but cross-cultural. We live in a global society, global economy, where businesses can speak, where businesses in America can speak to businesses in Australia, very simply through technology. So key things when you're, and this is not just when you're either your locations are differently. You could have a cross-cultural working team, and you want to make sure that everything is being communicated effectively so that everyone can understand. So speak clearly, use common words, avoid slang, jargon, buzzwords, avoid human sarcasm. People could take your human sarcasm as an insult. You don't want that. Learn different communication styles. So do some studying. If you're going to a country, and this kind of goes with the next bullet point, learning the words in the language. If you're going to a different country for a business trip, learn the communication styles, learn the customs, learn if you should bow, how far you should bow. Should you shake someone's hand? Should you put your hand out first, allow them to put their hand out first? Just get the basics before you travel. Very important. Do not assume yes and no means the same thing in all cultures. That's true. Be really mindful of that. Learn the correct greetings. Be aware of important social rituals. Learn to decipher silence. So silence could, sometimes silence, we don't like silence. We want to fill silence up, but it can mean a lot of different things. It could mean that if you're saying something to someone else and they're silent, that doesn't mean, it could be just mean they're contemplating, understanding, and appreciating what you're saying before they respond. But silence is uncomfortable, and we try to eliminate it. And sometimes you shouldn't. Especially, another side tip here, if you're giving a presentation, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's on a stage with 1,000 people, the use of silence is your one of the most impactful and powerful tools you can use, because it keeps the audience in little suspense. So just consider that. You don't have to go really fast, nor do you have to fill in the silence with ums and so forth. You don't have to do that. Be flexible, especially regarding time. Time is very interesting. There are cultures like America, for example, where we're so rushed. We need to get things done fast. We got to move fast. If we have to, everything is fast, fast, fast. In other cultures, that's not the same. A lot of cultures really put in high regard taking your time, being more zen and relaxing. So be mindful of that. When unsure, err on the side of formality. And you could always go back to that as a baseline, the utmost professionalism if you're unsure. And really pay attention and look at what other people are doing and emulate them, especially people who are in that culture, or people that you've maybe taken the trip with who've been there before. Follow their lead. How leaders inspire through language. Direction giving and uncertainty reducing, relationship building, and meaning making. All keys that can help to use language that motivates. And direction giving is essentially you are giving the path forward. You're giving your team a roadmap, right? That roadmap and people seeing something that they couldn't see 5 minutes ago is very motivating. They know where they need to go. They know they need to focus on. It really gets them engaged. And uncertainty reducing, giving that map allows them to, again, kind of what I just said, allows them to know where they're going. I go back to my example of putting your team on a soccer field with no goals and throwing a ball and telling them to score a goal. That's a lot of uncertainty. But putting a goal up and saying, look, the goal's that way. I need you to work as a team and put this ball in that goal. That's a lot of uncertainty reduction right there. They know where they're going. Relationship building, that builds trust. And trust is hugely important in business, but it's important in building relationships. And meaning making sure that what you're saying has meaning. You're not just speaking in terms of generalities, but you're speaking in specifics. So speeches of charismatic leaders contain more references to. This is a very interesting slide as well. But what are those, those famous leaders, those Steve Jobs, Martin Luther Kings out there who provided, who have great stage presence, who deliver great messages that inspire action, inspire following. So what do they make references to? So they share collective history and continuity between past and present. They collect identity and fewer references to individual self-interest. That's really how you gather a following and gaining trust with people, is you're allowing everyone to have a collective identity and knowing that the person to the left and the person to the right are just like you. Followers' worth and efficacy as individuals and as collective. Leaders' similarity to the followers. Values and moral justifications and fewer reference to tangible outcomes or instrumental justifications. Kind of mentioned this before, but think in terms of you can repeat a process, but you can never it's easy to repeat a process than it is to repeat an outcome, right? And just think of that. And especially when we're talking about values and moral justification, that's what that means. It's focus on things that you can 100% control. You can control what your values are. You control how moral you are and how you behave. You can't rely on and can't guarantee an outcome. Distant goals and distant future. We want to be looking forward. We want a better tomorrow. And hope and faith are all important. Let me ask you this. Would it have been as powerful if Martin Luther King Jr. used a PowerPoint presentation in his I Have a Dream speech? So if he got on there, obviously this was impossible at that time, but if he got on there, he booted up his MacBook and had a projector and put the slide on there. Racism is bad. Let's end racism together. Let's end racism with the next generation. No, it would not have the same impact. It wouldn't be as historic, and it wouldn't feel as authentic as if you were to do it as he did, just talking to an audience. There was no distraction. This is a distraction. Right now, you listening to this, you listening to me, looking at the slide is a distraction, right? The words on the bottom, copyright, is a distraction. The green is a distraction on the sides. Martin Luther King Jr. eliminated the distraction. It was him and his message, because the message resonated through him, and that's what it needed to be. If you had a PowerPoint, it would have watered it down. I guess the point here is that you don't always have to have a PowerPoint presentation. Obviously, I have one here for the lecture purposes, but it's not always needed. If you're having a team meeting and if you have to give some bad news about work cuts or freezes on bonuses, you don't want to chalk up a PowerPoint in that situation, because it's less personal, right? Moving forward. So effective communicators avoid the curse of knowledge. So this is from Chip and Dan Heath. They're very good authors, by the way. Anyway, the curse of knowledge is the assumption that people outside of your area of expertise understand the insider knowledge that we take for granted, and that clouds our ability to speak in a way that others understand. It's a very, very good quote from Chip and Dan Heath. Why do leaders tell optimistic stories? When this kind of goes back to think in terms of Steve Jobs and Martin Luther King and just other influential historic figures, or even now, what are they doing and why do they tell optimistic stories? So optimism or optimistic people believe one individual can make a difference. Constituents want leaders who remain passionate despite obstacles. Incredible leaders sustain hope by painting positive images of the future. They arouse optimistic feelings and enable constituents to hold positive thoughts about the possibility of success. So there's a lot of the word positive and in that last sentence there, but positivity reigns. Being optimistic is being positive. So it kind of is a constant theme with these 3 bullet points. Optimism gives hope. It gives hope that there is a better tomorrow, that hope for tomorrow for the COVID is better than the dangerous realities of today. That's why optimistic stories, it rallies people, it energizes people, and it gives people an opportunity to have hope. So IBM uses, I've heard this before, I had this before a few times in my own studies, but this is a story that IBM, the company IBM, uses to pass on to its employees. And I absolutely love this. It's very good. So a young executive had made some bad decisions that cost the company several $1 million. He was summoned into Watson's office, fully expecting to be dismissed. As he entered the office, the young executive said, "I suppose after that set of mistakes, you will be wanting to fire me." Watson was said to have replied, "Not at all, young man. We have just spent a couple of $1 million educating you." I love that. Because obviously what you're thinking is that, okay, this guy made a mistakes and he's gone. But the point of the story is that just because people make mistakes, just because people may not have performed to a certain standard that you were expecting, does that make them a bad employee? It makes them maybe misguided. Maybe they didn't have enough information to do the job. Maybe they need additional training. Maybe there's tons of potential in this person. Now, granted, if this young executive made these mistakes out of spite or purposely, then he would be gone, obviously. But don't just look at the person, what they did. Look at the whole picture. Be mindful of what positive things that they can create for you in the future. And is that person worth keeping on board? Sometimes that is. So characteristics of a powerful story. So that was a good story, but what makes that story and others so powerful? Number one, it's simple. Listeners aren't overwhelmed by the details. That story just told was not overwhelming. It's relevant. People shouldn't be asking themselves, "Why are you telling me this?" Or "Where does this fit in?" Value driven. They express values held by the organization and society at large. Go back to the IBM story again. Inclusive. Everyone should be able to say, these are my people, this is my story, and I can be heroic too. Concrete, temporal, and action-oriented. They tend to have a protagonist who faces a dilemma that needs to be overcome in a sequence of causally a sequence of related events that evolve just over time, and a climax and a resolution and a moral and a lesson. So continued characteristics of a powerful story. They're emotional. They should excite, delight, surprise, or otherwise move the listener. They are not simply a series of facts strung together in logical order. They're unexpected. They surprise the listener with an unexpected twist that keeps listeners interested. Optimistic, friendly, not cynical. Even sad stories should leave the listener with feelings of hope, joy, or satisfaction. They're shared by many people. They should be interesting and important enough to be told by many people to many people. That story, I've seen it many places, and it's worth sharing. An appeal to our desire to feel unique. They make people feel special and different in an important way. So how to tell a good story? So here's some things that you can incorporate. Know why you're telling the story. Meaning, what key beliefs and values do you want to express? There should be a moral to the story. As they say, what's the moral of the story? You've heard that, I'm sure, many times. What exactly are you trying to do with the story? You need to be having a purposeful outcome. Know how you want listeners to feel. It's the tone of how you say it. Know your audience and talk in their language, and set the stage. Be visual so that people can see the story unfold in their minds. Stories are meant to create visual pictures. And you could probably sense from that IBM story, the young executive, sloped over, slouched over, just sad, slowly opens the door creaks open, he shuts the door behind him, makes the sound. You hear the steps of his business shoes clacking against the floor as he makes his way to Watson. Watson looks up and they have the conversation. You want to paint the picture a little bit so it gives people a visual, and that really helps to further solidify the story. Introduce tension. Now, what critical issues are faced? What dilemmas must be resolved? Don't be so secretive. Going back to being simple, don't be so secretive of what these are. Just make them known. Be dramatic. Use well-integrated pauses, vary your gestures, and mimic characters' voices or actions. Use rhythm, balance, and repetition. This can mesmerize and increase retention. And that's what you want. You want people to not look at their phones and watch cat videos. You want them to pay attention. So we talked about kind of what you should be doing. What shouldn't you be doing when you're doing storytelling? Don't fill in too many details. Know which points should be embellished and what should be left simple and what should be left out. Don't tell people how they should feel. That's an important one. Don't preach. The best stories don't tell people what to think, but create a space for them to think in. They leave room for alternative accounts. Don't keep telling stories that have outlived their usefulness. Don't overdo jokes, gimmicks, teasers. You may have people in your life, maybe it's a funny uncle, who says the same jokes over and over again, and it just drives you nuts. You don't want to be that manager who's telling the same story about your snowboarding accident 10 years ago. Just don't overdo it. Stay fresh. And if you don't have anything fresh, then go out and create new memories. How to get a story to go viral. This is the YouTube and TikTok world we live in, but how to get a story to go viral. The more stories that appeals to emotions, the more likely to get passed on. Stories are more likely to be told to others when the people telling them feel like they're helping others. And stories are more likely to be passed on when a trigger reminds the people to tell the story. Again, it's from Chip and Dan Heath. Organizations have multiple, sometimes conflicting stories. Not all organizational stories are initiated by managers and leaders. You could have some very great stories from peers, from individual contributors, or people on that front line. And as a matter of fact, the most inspiring stories come from the frontline people doing incredible things for a customer, going above and beyond. Those are the greatest stories, and ones that are captivating and wanting you to pass it along and tell it to other people. Not all organizational stories support the organization's espoused beliefs, values, or goals. And so that could be even a negative one. You may want to say a cautionary tale. It may not be against the values and beliefs, but it could be a learning experience. Every story is open to multiple interpretations depending on the audience, context, and time in which the story is told. And that's just pretty obvious. If you think in relation to a book you've read or a poem you have read, people could interpret them very differently, and that's okay. Talk and technology. The practice of having multiple conversations simultaneously. So using different communication tools at the same time is an art and something you don't really want to do if you can avoid it. But we'll talk about in a moment. So you can have a telephone conversation with someone while simultaneously checking your email or sending a same time, checking your Facebook page. So you could be checking your email to find information relevant to the conversation. So you are supplementing and using the available resources to help you. And the person on the phone may be aware that you're checking your email to research information that is relevant to the phone conversation. On the other hand, you could be engaging in two entirely different conversations. A person on the phone may be wondering why there's gaps in you replying or you're asking the same questions. And you start to lose, again, that trust factor, that you're not paying attention to them, especially on the phone. When you're in person, it's much more difficult to get away with multitasking and sending instant messages or checking email. But you're on the phone and no one can see you. There's a lot of room for that. So you want to be here now. You want to make sure that you're in the moment when you're speaking with someone. So talking technology, rules for effective email. Emails are used a lot sometimes and mostly used too much. However, this is the world we live in. So how do you, what are some rules for effective rules for effective email? Use the right medium for the message. What that means is if there's an important deadline and you need something done to add to a report, don't use email, call the person. You need to find the most effective, fastest way to get important and urgent information to someone. Email is not. Consider email something that is non-urgent, and it could be used to just verify information, follow up, send meeting minutes or meeting notes, request documentation to be sent electronically. Those are the things you want to use it for. Think before you hit send key. Not only think before you hit send key, reread what you've written for grammatical errors and so forth. Sometimes your email spelling doesn't pick up on everything. But think before you hit the send key. And there's a few different things here that I want to talk about. First is the tone of the email appropriate? If you are writing an email in a frustrated state, do not send it. If you want to send it to yourself. Never ever send an email in a frustrated or an angered state. You want to make sure that you are rereading it, or better yet, have a peer read it, or another manager, or even one of your employees read it before you hit that send button. And so be professional. That's a given. Be accessible. Don't hide behind an email. This is easy to do. So if you have an angry customer, or it's sending an email allows you to protect yourself, to hide behind a wall, to not have to deal with that inevitable conversation. It's better not to send an email to an angry customer. Just give them a call. Be sensitive to power, be organized, be careful. As I mentioned before about make sure you're saying the right words, and not only be careful saying the right words, making sure that you're not including any sensitive information in your email, making sure that there's not social security numbers or addresses or any identifying to customers or internal staff. So you want to be mindful of that, but also be mindful and be careful that you have the right people on the email. Just because you're in an email string and someone's asking you a question does not mean you have to reply to all. You just have to reply to the people that are needed to see your message. Be very careful of that. People get in a bad habit of just replying to all on an email, and you don't always want to do that, especially if it's an internal question and you say, look, Frank, you're completely wrong. You shouldn't be telling the customer that. You don't want the customer on the email to read that. Make sure you're taking the people that shouldn't be on there off. Develop and distribute policies regarding email use. Your organization will definitely have that. And if you're an entrepreneur starting your own business, you should create your own. Talking technology, tips for managing voicemail. So update your greetings regularly, call yourself, listen to your greeting to see how it sounds to others. Another key thing, another reason why you should call yourself occasionally is make sure your email box is not full. Sometimes on your cell phone or potentially in your work mailbox, which probably won't happen, but just be mindful if it's full. I'll just check periodically. Let callers know when you're out of the office. So if you're going on a week vacation and the customer calls you on Monday and it says, leave a message, I'll get back to you soon. Well, that soon for you is going to be a week. Soon for them is, and if you get back to them within a week, they're going to be really mad. So when you are, when you're putting an out of office message on your emails or on your voice messages, make sure that you have a backup in place. So someone that knows your workload and maybe you want to sit with that person that's covering you and go over certain things with them so they're prepared, but you want to have someone there to back you up. Redirect calls when you're out of the office. So if you're on the road, if you're a salesperson and you have your work phone, but you also have an office phone, you can set up your work phone to redirect the calls to your cell phone. Check messages when out of the office if possible, and return calls promptly, especially if it's an urgent matter. That should be a given. So continued for talking technology for voicemail. Don't over rely on voicemail to avoid people. Again, we all have the ability on our cell phones to send people to voicemail they want to talk to, but sometimes just talking to the person, getting it over with and moving on allows you to not think about the person, allows you to not have to carve out time in order to call a person back. It's just a time waster. Just get it done. Be clear and concise when leaving messages. People don't want to hear a long-winded messages. I want to get these. It drives me nuts. Just say who you are, what you need, and a callback number. All you need. Don't tell the full story. When they call you back, then you can tell them the full story. You don't need to hear it on the voicemail. Plus, it clogs up their email, their voicemail space. Never leave angry or critical voicemails. That will come back to haunt you. Look at Alec Baldwin. Research Alec Baldwin and his daughter. I'll leave it at that. Remember, voicemails can be forwarded to others. So if there's something that's asking you and it's in a different department than you are, then you can forward that voicemail. I think all of voicemail programs have this ability. And remember that language as a symbol determines much of the nature and quality of your experiences. So something to kind of take away. So that is the end of this chapter's lecture. And so again, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.